Never found them. Just some poor orphans living with the farmer. I let Dagmar slit their throats. And I let him burn the bodies. And make my father proud. My real father lost his head at King's Landing. I made a choice. And I chose wrong. Now I've burned everything down.
George R. R. Martin has often said that the only thing worth writing about is the human heart in conflict with itself. And to me, no character better symbolizes this concept than Theon Greyjoy. Theon Greyjoy is one of the most interesting and heartbreaking characters in A Song of Ice and Fire. He's a character whose heart is constantly in turmoil with itself from the first time that we meet him. When we first meet Theon, he's an insecure and borderline insufferable character. He's a man that forcefully projects his insecurities and feelings of inadequacy onto whoever he can find that he feels could possibly be beneath him. That is why, during a Game of Thrones, he goes out of his way to disrespect Jon Snow. Since Jon is a bastard, Theon feels that he's the only person in Winterfell that he truly has some power over. This is also why, in his opening chapter of A Clash of Kings, he makes sure to remind himself and the captain's daughter that she's sleeping with a prince, and that he's above her. And while a lot of people cannot stand Theon in A Clash of Kings, and I can't say I blame them, I personally find myself pitying Theon more than anything. When we first get inside of Theon's head, the first thing that's made apparent is the deep-seated conflict that he has within his heart between being a Stark and a Greyjoy. And the first thing that we need to cover with the character of Theon is why he has this conflict to begin with. After Balon Greyjoy rebels and is crushed by Robert Baratheon and Ned Stark, Ned takes Theon as a captive and makes him his ward. Now, this is not something new to Westeros. Very often, after a lower house rebels, the Lord of the Victor will take a son as a captive. They are usually treated well, but they are a captive nonetheless. But with that being said, Theon's situation at Winterfell is quite unique because he isn't only treated well, he's treated and raised almost like he's one of the Stark children. He's closer to being brothers with Robb than just a friend or acquaintance. Bran looks up to him in a way, and he's just constantly around the family. He's even allowed to go hunting with them and use a bow and arrow. It's interesting that a child who's supposedly a captive is allowed to have a weapon that he could easily rebel with. This trust that Ned Stark has in him shows that Theon isn't just a simple ward or captive, he is part of their family in his own right. This is why I personally believe that if Balon Greyjoy were to rebel again, Ned Stark would have possibly found a way around beheading Theon. I feel the familiar bond that he shares with House Stark would have overwhelmed the custom of a ward losing his head if the father rebels. And this bond that Theon has with House Stark is the backbone of his inner conflict throughout A Clash of Kings. When Theon is told to get the Ironborn on Robb's side, he takes the opportunity to metaphorically free himself from captivity, even though he wasn't a captive in the traditional sense, and he decides to press his claim to the Seastone Chair, only to find out when he returns to Pike that he isn't really a true Ironborn anymore, and everyone sees him for what he is. He dresses differently, he speaks with a slightly different accent, the food that he has eaten has been different, his entire existence has been one of a Stark, not of a Greyjoy. And deep down, Theon knows this. When Asha constantly one-ups him and everyone laughs at him, deep down he knows that there is some truth to their words. He has changed. His bond with Robb and his time at Winterfell wore him down, and this feeds into his insecurity. One thing that is incredibly overlooked when talking about the character of Theon is his lack of a father figure. Theon being removed from Pike as a child made it impossible for him to have a real relationship with his biological father. But unfortunately, due to the laws and customs of Westeros, it was also impossible for Ned Stark to truly fill that void. Theon says that Ned was kind to him, but never warm. That he was always kept at a distance, with ice between them. This, not so subtly symbolized by Theon being the one who helps Ned draw ice in the opening chapter of A Game of Thrones. So because of this, Theon didn't really have a father to raise him, and this left him with lifelong issues. In the real world, there are thousands of studies detailing the long-term effects of what growing up without a father can do to a young man. While there are definitely different variables, and this isn't a set rule, it isn't uncommon for children who grow up without a father figure to suffer from a deep sense of inadequacy as an adult. These feelings often show themselves through emotional outbursts, societal rule-breaking, aggression, and abusive behaviors. And unfortunately, Theon fits this description to a T. In many ways, Theon reminds me of that one person everyone knows. The guy who's had a troubled life and has made some really bad decisions, but you hope they escape and pull through nonetheless. But more on that topic later. Now, with that out of the way, Theon is placed in a difficult situation by his father. He needs to prove himself, and the only way to do that is to betray the family that he's been living with for over a decade in favor of the family that he thought he always wanted. And unfortunately, Theon chooses wrong. He makes the decision to betray Robb, to take Winterfell by force, to behead a man that he once looked up to murder and burn innocent farm boys that could have potentially been his sons, but that's a theory for another day, and because of a bunch of other dumb decisions, he caused Winterfell to fall into the hands of the Boltons, which gets hundreds of men killed, including Maester Luwin, who in truth was the closest thing to a father that Theon ever had. And then, as we all know, Theon is taken and held captive by Ramsay for over a year, but disappears from the story for 2 whole books, which is 11 whole years in our world. Can you imagine being one of the 10 people whose favorite character was Theon in A Clash of Kings, and you had to wait 11 years for the next chapter? Absolutely brutal. But moving forward, when we eventually get to A Dance with Dragons, we meet this creature named Reek. And I say creature because there is next to none actual humanity left inside this husk of a person. This isn't a man trying to live. This is a creature with a fractured mind, sucking on the corpse of a dead rat that he killed with his last 3 teeth. This creature, who is called Reek, can hardly sit or stand due to the 5 missing toes he has. He can barely talk or taste anything due to his lack of teeth. He's missing fingers, skin, and is on the verge of starving to death. This is a creature that is scared of light, scared of thinking, and just scared of existing altogether. There is also the brutal implication that he has been sexually assaulted by Ramsay quite a few times. stating that if that is going to happen, he hopes the door is closed so that he can't see what is going on. By the end of the chapter, this creature is released from its cell, and when brought into the daylight, it's revealed that Reek was once Theon. The beautiful young man that women loved now has white hair that's falling out, and he resembles that of an old man than a guy in the prime of his life. And this chapter is incredibly tragic, and some of George R. R. Martin's most aggressive and disturbing moments of psychological horror, with the hardest part of this chapter being the ending. Throughout this chapter, Theon, now Reek, has lost all sense of who he once was, to the point where he's terrified to even think of himself as Theon, constantly repeating words that rhyme with Reek, that way he won't forget his name. But in the final paragraph, it's revealed that Ramsay Bolton wants Reek to pretend to be Theon, that way he can take a small castle currently held by the Ironborn. And this chapter, and the next one, are an all-time low for this character. At this point in the story, outside of saying that his name's Theon, there is nothing left of this character that resembles Theon. The once arrogant and good-looking young man who never stopped smirking at people has been morphed into this shell of a person. A shell that feels getting to sleep in the kennels is an absolute win and something above his rank. At least the dogs have names, while Reek is just Reek. It's not a name, it's more of a title since there was a Reek before him. But at the end of Reek's second chapter, something very interesting occurs. When Arya Stark, who is actually Jane Poole, enters Winterfell, Theon, not Reek, comes out for a split second and states, "That is not Arya Stark." And all of a sudden, memories of who Theon once was and the relationship that he had with Arya start to seep into his mind. And it absolutely terrifies him. Because if Ramsay were to find out who or what he was thinking, he would lose a finger or two. But with that being said, this is a moment of hope for Theon's character. It's evidence that while he's lost so much, Theon is still in there. He's just being suppressed as a way to survive. The next chapter of note that I'm going to discuss is one of the most tragic chapters in A Song of Ice and Fire, The Prince of Winterfell. This chapter encompasses the wedding of Jane Poole to Ramsay Bolton. But what sticks out to me the most about this chapter is the dynamic between Theon and Jane. Theon and Jane are kindred spirits. They are both individuals that are undergoing abuse from Ramsay Bolton. And because of that, Theon subconsciously tries to protect her. This is something that will continue to grow over the course of his chapters, but for now, his care for her begins with being the one person in Winterfell that understands and treats her with kindness. He even bathes her softly and tries to give her advice on how to stay alive. One of the most interesting parts about this chapter is how before the unfortunate bedding, Theon thinks that using the knife he has at his hip, he could kill Ramsay and save Jane from his torment. He doesn't end up doing this, but even the fact that he's willing to think like this shows profound growth and hope from where he started in Reek 1. This is symbolized through his POV title name changing as A Dance with Dragons progresses. Something that will continue to happen. Unfortunately, however, the chapter ends with Reek's fear of Ramsay overpowering whatever bravery was left of Theon, with Ramsay further tormenting both Jane and Theon by making Theon warm her bed before Ramsay brutally abuses her. The next chapter, titled The Turncloak, has Theon trying his best to keep Jane Poole alive, offering her comfort when he can, and doing his best to hold her together. But for the most part, this chapter is built up for one of the most thematically potent and eerie chapters in all of A Song of Ice and Fire. A Ghost in Winterfell is Theon's 6th chapter in A Dance with Dragons, and it's incredible. This chapter is a murder mystery. Throughout it, there are a variety of different men suspiciously dying, whether it's being crushed by a falling stable or falling off a wall. And while this is happening, Theon isn't sleeping. He's taking the time to just walk around Winterfell and think over all of the mistakes that he has made. However, as the deaths get more and more important and frequent in terms of who's dying, the Bolton army becomes increasingly paranoid about who's committing the murders. This leads to infighting, in which Wyman Manderly gets a bunch of his chins sliced open, and about 10 men are left dead and or mortally wounded. However, Roose Bolton is never able to figure out who this hooded man is. And the hooded man is this person that's been spotted all over Winterfell around the circumstances of the murders. And while this has been a debate for over a decade, I firmly believe that the ghost in Winterfell who's been committing these murders is actually Theon. My first piece of evidence for this is the title of George R. R. Martin's chapters are seemingly always about the character whose POV it is. But beyond that, narratively, it makes a bunch of sense. About 75% of the way through the chapter, Theon comes face to face with the ghost in Winterfell, and the ghost laughs and snickers at Theon in a way that is suspiciously just how Theon used to laugh and snicker. I believe that the ghost in Winterfell is Theon's subconscious, unknowingly taking control of his body while he's sleepwalking and causing the mayhem in Winterfell as a way to repent for his sins against House Stark. This makes perfect sense when you consider hallucinations are a symptom of high levels of sleep deprivation. The chapter then ends with Theon leaning on the weirwood tree at the center of Winterfell, seeing Bran's face on the tree, and hearing his name whispered throughout the leaves. And that brings us to Theon's final chapter in A Dance with Dragons. In this chapter, titled Theon, Theon launches a plan to get Jane Poole out of Winterfell, risking not only his life, but the fear of getting flayed from head to foot. Regardless, Theon bravely holds himself and Jane Poole together as they flee Winterfell in order to reach Stannis' camp. What makes this all the more courageous is Theon knows he is a dead man either way. If he stays, Ramsay will kill him. If he leaves, Stannis will probably kill him for his crimes. But nonetheless, he chooses to jump from the top of the walls of Winterfell into the snow and bring Jane to a potential salvation. All because he felt it was the right thing to do. And while this chapter, in and of itself, is more than enough to cement Theon's journey as one of the best in the book series, there's still more to come. In Asha's final chapter of A Dance with Dragons, she sees an old man stumble into the camp holding a young girl. And this beautiful moment goes like this. A girl and an old man, thought Asha, as the two were dumped rudely in the snow before her. The girl was shivering violently, even in her furs. If she had not been so frightened, she might even have been pretty, though the tip of her nose was black with frostbite. The old man, no one would ever think him calmly. She had seen scarecrows with more flesh. His face was a skull with skin, his hair bone-white and filthy, and he stank. Just the sight of him filled Asha with revulsion. He raised his eyes. "Sister, see? This time I knew you." Asha's heart skipped a beat. "Theon?" His lips skinned back into what might have been a grin. Half of his teeth were gone, and half of those still left were broken and splintered. "Theon," he repeated. "My name is Theon. You have to know your name." And with that being said, and me on the verge of tears just trying to get through this video, Theon Greyjoy's arc throughout A Song of Ice and Fire is one of the best arcs in not only this book, but in literature. Theon is that one family member everyone knows that lives a tough life and makes terrible decisions, but somehow, at the end of the day, he finds the light at the end of the tunnel. It's a journey of a man whose entire character revolves around the human heart in conflict with itself, finding closure and a semblance of peace after literally being torn limb from limb. He's a man who found himself on the wrong side of every decision, who was punished immensely for his crimes, and now, even though he's physically a shell of who he once was, the one thing that Ramsay couldn't take from him was his soul. Theon's story is the story of the human heart in conflict with itself. Theon's story is one of hope, one of how much humanity can endure, one of no matter how hard things get, no matter how far you fall, you can always pick yourself back up, try again, and find the light at the end of the tunnel. I just want to say thank you so much if you've made it this far. Theon is an incredibly important character to me. I deeply resonate with him, and he is the only character in A Song of Ice and Fire that was really able to pull true tears out of me. His final line in A Ghost in Winterfell, where he's crying up against the weirwood tree, gets me choked up just thinking about it. And more than anything, I just love how human his journey is throughout A Song of Ice and Fire. George R. R. Martin has said in the past that Theon is the most human character, and I believe that. And I also believe that whenever George R. R. Martin is talking about the human heart in conflict with itself, and that's the only thing worth writing about, I guarantee you he has Theon in mind. Because Theon Greyjoy is that idea personified. Again, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope to catch you in the next one. Have a great day.